I'll quickly also get into to say there is no coordination between opposition and civic society. Do you understand that civic society is a constituent of its own and the opposition is a constituent of its own? I don't see anything wrong much on that. Let me probably visit the issue of the, you draw us to a point, say, where you said part of the crisis emanated from the 2017 coup, where we all made probably a blunder, endorsed even by the opposition. And I want to believe that the 2018 elections, to some extent, was an opportunity to deal with that issue, as it seeked closure to such. And we started a new chapter. I want to move faster and draw to the issue that I think the ghost that is haunting our country, the legitimacy, illegitimacy question. How real is that issue? Because from my understanding is that legitimacy can never be drawn, not even from the international community, not even from any other either position papers or any kind of mobilization, but want to sober up and say, we must draw legitimacy from the Constitution. Yes, there are issues of dispute. But do you remember that in 2013, we all moved around the country and agreed to the Constitution, where in that very same Constitution, the opposition had 2 representatives and the one from ZANU-PF. And we said this is the new Constitution that unfortunately is remaining new also. But the issue is, we agreed and said this is the Constitution that we must then listen to, not part of it. The human rights issues we are speaking about is the Bill of Rights from the Constitution. And the very courts who then gave us the unpopular outcome out of the 2018 elections, they exist in terms of the very same Constitution. So are we saying we will take part of the Constitution and make it an agenda? The other one, we say, no, this one, we cannot do it. What am I drawing to? I am saying, at the moment, we need, in particular, appeal with the opposition to say, are we going with this Constitution or we are saying, let's start afresh? What are you saying? Because for now, we are guided with the Constitution.
But useless to keep insisting that Emerson is illegitimate. That may be so, but he is recognized in the region. Okay? So maybe the idea of the dialogue should begin by each side making concessions. Emerson's not insisting that he won the election when he didn't win the election, but agreeing that there's a dispute, but therefore I should go to the table to discuss. Shamisha should stop insisting that he won the election and that it should be in State House. He should also agree that in the circumstances it's better to go for a transitional arrangement until the next election during which the issues are raising. That's one. The second point I want to raise, one raised by Michael. How do you break the vicious cycle, Timo? We know without an injection of funds into the country, there is nowhere we're going. But in the same vein, there can be no injection of funds until there's reform. And we have just said this government is incapable of reform. It was Jonathan Moyo in his earlier life who said, we can't allow ourselves to reform ourselves out of power. That is exactly the position. So how do we break this deadlock? Let's try and address those 2 questions. Tsitsi, again, can I take someone else? Yes?
I am Justina Mpoku. On what needs to be done, she has by all means proven that abductions are real and they actually took place, that Gonyet was abducted. Don't you think it's necessary to approach and assist police with information? It seems like you know very well that abductions happened and maybe give the information. After you give police that information, their leads, if they fail to arrest, then there is a case now. Because the moment people are coming to report to your organization, you do not have arresting powers. How does that help in the end in this so-called abduction? My other question is directed to Dr. Ibo Mandela. when you were he was introducing Mr. Tim, he said, my friend, when he was giving an opportunity to Mr. Michael, also said, my friend. So I want to know, what needs to be done now is to understand the reasons why we do these discussions. Is it to plan an agenda, or is to make way forward, or is to sustain this trust so that it keeps on getting some funds here and there to keep on moving? If they are friends, are they your friends, personal friends that you usually meet outside this platform, you plan the agenda to them, or you say friends just to convince us that
The police themselves were quite astonished. They didn't know what to do. They're helpless in the face of these abductions, and that's the first thing. It speaks to the flashlessness within the state, the division within the state. The second, yes, it's true. Timo and Michael are my friends, very good friends. Yes.
What is the problem? There's been talk of Emerson Mnangagwa and Emerson Chamisi. And indeed, like I've always pushed the narrative that here in Zimbabwe, we have a leadership crisis, not just in ZANU-PF, but also on the opposition side. Because we have two men flaunting their egos, whilst the nation suffers. And especially as a youthful activist, I speak on behalf of the youth. Now we have what we call a generational genocide, in terms of the fact that now the youth are unemployed, they're engaging in drugs, and people no longer have any future to look up to. So technically, this is now a case whereby we should question, or the answers we need should be looked into the citizens. This is no longer an MDC ploy. This is no longer a ZANU-PF ploy. Because both this cabal has shown that their intent is either on grabbing and looting or on getting power. But like I've once said, that you cannot say Zimbabwe is open for business whilst you're shutting down business by abducting people, by ruling over lawlessness in the nation. And you cannot keep on saying you did a JHA when you know that did any JHA, we are the people who are suffering. And as I was sitting down, I was looking through an image on a WhatsApp message of two birds talking. One was in a cage, the other one was out. And it was a crow and a parrot. The crow was asking the parrot, why are you in a cage? And the parrot responded, because I speak. Now it's an issue where we have people who speak, they are trying to be muzzled. And those who do not speak, they are being pushed to the forefront. We have, like I said, we have a leadership vacuum. We have a group of war veterans who must believe the association is mainly headed by men who suffer from logoria. Incoherent speech, they just speak out of nowhere. They don't have any credible information to give to the nation. So at this point, as the youth, I think we should take the initiative, proper dialogue, push these people to the forefront. That's why even if you see Killer Zifu was suspended for suggesting that Nelson Chamisa's wife and his wife should band together their husband. The problem we have in Zimbabwe is that we push aside people who talk sense, and we accept nonsense. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Makombore. I'm talking to some people here. And also citizens, they make the representatives, service representatives. It's not like representative of political parties, whether ruling opposition or those opposing the opposition. But my concern is the citizen. It's where I'm coming from. Transport is unaffordable. There's load shedding. It's actually very dangerous for me to even go home right now, because in the dark you can get robbed. And transport is unaffordable. You don't know the price. The price that you used to get into town is different from the one that you used to get back home. You try to go to the super buses, you pickpocketing everything, you lose everything. There's high unemployment. Those are the issues that affect me as a citizen. Unemployment, dead industries, there's no hope. You try to maybe even speak out, you get arrested, given charges of trying to subvert. You speak up against corruption, against poverty, but you are accused of trying to subvert a whole government. Are we saying our government is corruption? Are we saying we are being governed by corruption or by hunger? That is the critical question as a citizen, and the citizens that we should come to. Because what I feel is there has been a political impasse. Coup and immediately post-coup elections and immediately post-elections period. But now the era and the terrain we are in, we acknowledge, and I'm sure that political parties, there may be even platforms where they discuss this issue of legitimacy or illegitimacy. But as citizens, we should also have issues or platforms like this one, where we discuss about our problems, issues that are affecting us, and also provide solutions. What we proffer to the solutions that we have over billions disappearing in command agriculture. We have billions which are disappearing in diamonds. We have billions more disappearing in NASA. We have more money disappearing every day. We have Sinara collecting our toll fees, but our roads every day, the potholes are turning into pitholes. So as citizens now, what do we really need? We have, because my question is going towards asking, what kind of solution do we need? Because there are platforms like, the Pollard, but a citizen, I was not a presidential candidate, come on. And some of the people who are there are not even affected by the issues that are affecting me of unemployment. Maybe they're already employed, maybe Pollard is a form of employment because of the issues that they affect people. So, if we are to have a dialogue, should this still remain just a dialogue, or people will simply contest it? So that I'm asking this so that as a citizen, I know if next election I will also contest for me to have my voice known or recognized by the government of the day, whether it wins or loses again. So the question now is, when it comes to solutions, I think now there should be a special type of consideration where we bring various special groups with special interests. We have the workers, they have problems. In January, they were persecuted. Their members, during the stay away, they were maimed, abducted, some were murdered, some were raped. We have, right now, as we are speaking, we have citizens from various groups, students, women groups, vendors, they are being persecuted. So if you are to have a dialogue, or to have a solution, it should include all these interests, not just the legitimate question. The legitimate question, yes, is there, and it should be addressed, but it should never at any point, overcome or overshadow the brilliant but issues that we are speaking of. Yes, it's a critical issue, it's a critical part of the equation to solutions, but we should also have the critical voices of us, the citizens, various, from the civil society especially, and trade unions, student movements, social movements, etc. Because where we are not only just focusing on the legitimate question, because there are no power issues concerned, but there are real influence questions concerned. There are real issues of, if we are, even some of us who are to go back home right now, we are not even comfortable sleeping at our homes. Well, maybe by even contributing, we can receive a midnight visit, which will be a visit, not visit, depending on whose agenda it is or who is articulating it. But I'm sure, I think it's a serious reminder to all of us here on how we respond to issues of abductions. When Dad Zamara went missing, most of the people spent months disputing, saying, he's in South Africa, he's Botswana, no, they are lying, it's a plot. But look, it's years now. It's yet to be seen. Is it still a plot? What does it take for people to really acknowledge that there's been an abduction? What does it really take for people to acknowledge that there's been a human rights violation? What does it take? We see even people, injured, who have been tortured. We see even government ministers saying that it's a skit. But I think we really take this issue seriously and also have a solution, a kind of mindset towards the problems that we have. Because they are real, we are all suffering.
Not much, but I just wanted to start by highlighting this issue of legitimacy and illegitimacy. I think it is still taking the nation backwards. In March last year, I personally took the current president of Zimbabwe to the Constitutional Court to challenge the legitimacy issues. Nelson Chamisa and company refused to be part of that challenge because the So at the end of the day, the moment we're supposed to challenge legitimacy of the so-called junta government or whatever we want to call them today, the main opposition party was not interested. Maybe because they had signed deals that they had done with them. So we cannot continue crying foul, yet they went into an election, we all went into an election knowing that ZANU-PF was not going to let go of power after getting power in whatever way they got it in November 2017. Almost everyone in this room participated in those matches and everything else. And now today, fast forward, we want to cry about legitimacy and illegitimacy issues. We have to stop these power struggles, power fights and everything else. Because those people who are leading Zimbabwe to fight against each other are sitting pretty in the houses in Glenlawn, in Amsterdam and everything else. And I'm calling upon civic society today to stop taking sides of political parties and to start standing up and representing the people of Zimbabwe. The people of Zimbabwe have suffered enough. And politicians have been manipulating their poverty, have been manipulating their helplessness so that they continue having their support. The people of Zimbabwe need proper education on their constitutional rights, which they are not aware of. They're just told to go and sit in the street. Sitting in the street is a crime on its own. As in 2016, I was actually taken to prison for obstruction of traffic and everything else. So when political parties are not educating their members that what they are doing is illegal, and when they get arrested, they say it's abuse of human rights, I think we are missing it somewhere. We have to be factual about real things. Political leaders have to teach their members to do the right things, legal things, and stop crying for every time. Civic society has to stand for every Zimbabwean citizen and be able to educate them on their fundamental human rights. Because it is folly. We are always here, and thank you very much, Mr. Mandaza, for providing this platform. But this platform has to go down to the grassroots, to the high density areas, to rural areas, so that people start getting an appreciation of their rights. We will find that almost every time we have these conversations, it's the same crowd, same people, and the only people who are managing to watch this on live stream are people in the diaspora, because data is too expensive. How is this information that we are sharing in this room going down to the grassroots? Do they have an appreciation of things that are going on in this country and what needs to be done? And lastly, I just want to ask Reverend Mutata, through ZCC, they've been doing well in trying to have this conversation with political leaders, the dialogues and everything, to be able to go to the military leadership and say it's time you engage with the Zimbabweans, understand what they want and where they want to go. Because honestly, a person with a knife cannot fight with a person with a gun. We have to dialogue for us to be able to understand that there is no one who is more Zimbabwean than the other. We are all Zimbabweans, and we have to converge and meet at that center post where we are saying this is the direction that we want to take as Zimbabweans. Thank you.
The discourses from the other two presenters, except that today I have a rare opportunity to talk to the ambassador from the European Union, and it is only him that I'm going to direct my question to. So welcome, Mr. Ambassador. In fact, His Excellency, and it's my opportunity to talk to you. Firstly, I want to ask you this question, Mr. You come from Europe, and you are the chief diplomat of all countries in the European Union. You saw what happened to France with regards to the Yellow Vest protest, and I'm sure you are pretty aware of the processes that unfolded there. And the heavy-handedness which the French government responded to those peaceful, or I would say relatively peaceful protesters, as compared to what we saw in January in Zimbabwe, whose protests were surrounded with massive looting, violence, and as well as the August 1 shootings, which were also characterized with an attempt to assault, to set the ruling party's headquarters, where I was anyway, in the fire after a subordinate headquarters in another province had been set on fire. Can you do a comparative analysis between the two? And honestly, are you convinced as the European Union ambassador that what France did was right in the circumstances involved, but what our government did, maybe let me just say on the 16th of August, from which your statement came from, was completely bad? Let's analyze the two, and I'm sure in the two instances, only button sticks were used, except that in France they were heavy. Let me also come to the statement that you issued, His Excellency. Don't you think you talked about the fear of being misconstrued as a person who is delving so much into the internal affairs of a sovereign? I would want to say maybe you expressed that fear knowing full well that you have done that. I'm sorry, Mr. Ambassador, but here is what I may just want to take you through. Do you think you are the only ambassador or diplomat seconded to this republic from Zambia to Limpopo? Of course, certainly not. How many ambassadors or diplomatic missions do we have from Africa who are closer and brothers and sisters more than perhaps you are, given the acrimonious relationship that surrounds colonization? Now, my question to you is, do you think all others that have not been quiet and have restricted themselves to the established decorum of diplomatic missions are fools or don't love us so much than you do. At the same time, you speak glowingly of restrictive measures against us. They have not instituted, and they are trying to help us to help ourselves. You are not doing that. In fact, you are proud of the restrictive measures that you are talking about. Do you think you are not doing much? Then secondly, thirdly, you know what the instance that, we talk these things, Dr. Ibomandas, I'm sorry, but I'm trying to be as civil as I should be as a reflection of the reforms that are also happening. Now, I'll say, you saw the American diplomatic servicemen and women in the house of an opposition senior leader. And, I don't know whether you've been in Chitungizo, maybe you have also had the privilege to be there under the cover of darkness. Now, there is so much that happens in those outskirts of the town. Assuming a committee of members could have ramped into that room and something very bad would have happened to the diplomatic servicemen and women from the United States of America, which is bullying us and also being part of this strategy to organize against our government, which you also know very well, and what we only saw in those pictures were V11 forms, and here we mean evidence when we talk about V11. What do you think could have happened to our government in terms of having to take responsibility for those errant diplomatic servicemen and women? I don't want you to speak on behalf of America. That is why I've not even spoken much about Zidera. But I want you to tell me, particularly me, and then perhaps for the benefit of others, what that means in the conduct of diplomatic missions. And then finally, let me just say finally, though, and I'll not go far. You talk so much about the existence of the right to demonstration, which has become so topical in this our generation. Do you think the right to demonstrate and protest exists completely ignorant of the institutions of the state and that are part of our constitutional democracy which are supposed to guarantee those rights? I talk of the courts. I also talk of the policing institution, that is the regulating structures from the security architecture of the country. Assuming that a court has taken a decision that certain demonstrations should not take place for 1, 2, 3, 4 reasons, and then people say, no, we will proceed, but it is a court ruling. Now, what kind of a democracy exists specifically and exclusively for liberties without ensuring a workable nexus between those liberties and institutions of the state that are guaranteed to protect them? I'm saying this in conclusion, in one sentence. I'm saying this, Mr. Ambassador, because just for the benefit of you in particular, and I'm not holding you, please, that's why I'm trying to to put my smile very well. The reason why we had acrimonious relations between the white race in this country and the black race in this country, of course, more from a political party, at around early 2000, which resulted in those water pictures that you would not want to take a second look on. It was because of what I would call diplomatic activism from diplomatic missions from both their countries, by way of some of those statements and by way of also that errant behavior where they are found hatching a plan against the government in those houses. So I'm saying, don't you think what is happening currently, or what has started happening, may be setting a dangerous course against that could possibly provoke the recurrence of such a situation again? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, building on what Linda has said and what Makomorero has said, is that what we need is a consolidated, non-political approach to what is happening. Because any political approach is going to be moving in the same circles as the political dispensation that has created the problem. So we need to have some kind of non-political way of engaging with the problems. I repeat again, it is all very well for us to laugh at people and say they don't know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. What they're doing is demoralizing the population in order to exploit the population, in my opinion. That's what I see. So if you want to go to work in favor of the population, we have to start from there. And we have to work outside that whole political nexus, because the opposition, wonderful as it may be, has not delivered for us. Elections have not delivered for us. We have to think outside the box. I am talking to people who are discussing non-party elections. And I say, look, this is a good idea. Let's have a paper about this. Then they come back to me and they say, oh, but I've been talking to someone. We can't do that. We don't have a backer. You know, these are things that the churches can spearhead this. Also, we need education in the population. The population knows nothing. There are ex-combatants who are ladies now who told me, Tsitsi, the system is stacked. We all know this, so why don't we talk about it? War veterans are there as a reserve army. People think that the president is the big chief who gives them land. They know no better. And I don't see that we are engaging with them. With all due respect for humanitarian assistance, I would say that humanitarian assistance, when it is only humanitarian assistance, is actually supporting. Because that humanitarian assistance goes through the government, so a government induces poverty, so that the people have to rely on them. The rest of the world gives the government meal and whatever to give to the people. So we have to get out of this spiral. And I really would like to ask the gentleman from the EU there that I think you have to rethink also the way you are engaging here, because it hasn't happened. You mentioned 2002 sanctions. We are now in 2019 and the situation is worse. You know, I don't know what you have to think about there, but obviously it hasn't worked. I always ask people from Europe, do you do the same thing in your own country? Do you have programs for 17 years that do not work in your own country without sitting down and saying, what do we need to do differently? But the main thing is up to us. We have to work outside the political agenda in order to influence the political situation.
Zimbabwe and the European Union was based on the Cotonou Agreement. And an article that says development assistance is based on the country which we voluntarily signed up to of good governance, rule of law, and human rights. And then the judgment was made by the European Union in 2002 that that did not apply in Zimbabwe. Then a process began of negotiation, apparent negotiation, about how to resolve that problem. My understanding is, and to put it bluntly, the Zimbabwean government basically gave the EU the middle digit. Right? They didn't talk to you, they just ignored you, and every time you had to try to have the discussions, no discussions happened. And none of those discussions happened pretty much until the coup. But in the meantime, Zimbabwe, very unusually, because I looked at this in some detail, was treated in exemplary fashion compared to other countries that fail under Cotonou. A lot of countries that fail under Cotonou just get booted out. You try the Article 92 conversation, and if that doesn't happen, Cotonou's over and you're out of Cotonou and you never get any money. So Zimbabwe actually got treated with a very soft touch. Not only did EU aid increase, new agreements were signed to allow exports to happen. So I'm very curious about this somewhat kid gloves approach with Zimbabwe. And that's one aspect that I'd like some clarification. The second one is that one of the problems that Zimbabwe has internationally is that we reach crisis points, and when you reach the crisis point, people back off. And in November 2017 was a classic crisis point. There was the distinction between a military-assisted transition, which was basically chasing the bums on the seat in an internal party matter, or that the military intervened directly in civilian affairs in violation of the Constitution. Now, those coups generally produce a very robust international reaction. And that reaction might well have produced the crisis that Kenneth was talking about, how we resolve it. Somehow we fudged that. So you don't call it a coup in Zimbabwe. We treat us with a soft hand, and now we're in this mess, and you're being attacked, I think probably very unfairly. So, you know, it's clarification about the soft touch when we clearly are in violation of the Cotonou Agreement and refuse to talk to you in any substantial way. And then when there is a very serious crisis where you can pull everybody out and bring us to the negotiating table, you don't.
Thank you.
Humbled by many of the comments, particularly on the internal situation here in the country, and I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to learn every day about what's the situation and how people experience the situation. For a while I was thinking that, oh good, I'm not getting any questions, but then I got quite a few. So I'm trying to respond to those. Starting with the Yellow West, yes. Some people might know that I try to be active in the social media, and there's a lot of these Yellow West questions coming to my way. Now there's a word for this. It's called whataboutism. What about? This is happening in this country. What about that? Then asking the question. I'm not here to defend of what's happening in France. But just to be curious, I was looking up, what's happening there, and people have gotten hurt. And originally, a couple, in the beginning, it was about basically people getting hurt by traffic when they were out on the streets. Then later on, because they were hit by tear gas canisters, there was these kind of events. But it's not. I'm the European Union ambassador in Zimbabwe. I'm not the European Union ambassador to France. So I'm not there really. I can't answer on France's behalf. What I can say that these events that have been happening in France have generated quite a lot of discussion in the European Parliament and elsewhere. And they have raised these questions about proportionate response. What is proportionate? And that's basically a very topical question here as well. What is the proportionate response in a given situation? Now, our thinking has been, how we have seen, based on the evidence that we have, is that the responses have not been proportionate in various circumstances. In January and now even now recently. And that has also been one of the triggers why we have voiced our concerns. On diplomatic decorum and our behavior and how we act, and me and perhaps some of my colleagues, and then some other colleagues don't. I do apologize if we have seemed to be disrespectful. That's far from how we would want to appear. We start from a point of mutual respect, but we also believe in being frank and honest. Now, the reason why we have come out is that we have a constituency back home. I'm representing the European Union as an institution, and indirectly the taxpayers, who share a number of values, who are also investing through development cooperation, through their taxpayers' money. I have responsibilities towards my own constituency also to stand up and voice the concerns that we have. I'm driving the interests of the European Union, and upholding our common values are some of those interests. Maybe not all of my colleagues, they might not have the same necessity to come out and speak, but I can't speak on their behalf. Our US colleagues, and pictures and stories, like I've repeated already in the media that it's like these kind of conspiracy theories that is happening, and how our diplomats are fueling unrest, and so I have said we have discussed those within our community, and I don't believe in them. Pictures about meeting opposition representatives. We have heard from the government when we have been discussing that we are at liberty of interacting with various actors, throughout the society. It's part of our work. So if some of the colleagues are seen discussing with some people, I don't find that necessarily surprising. It's part of the diplomatic work. Right to demonstrate, is it that there's limitations and so on? Of course. There's a question about demonstration and the responsibilities of that demonstrators also have. Condemn the vandalism and violence wherever whoever the perpetrator might be. But but there's a difference here of looking at, what is, about security forces being also there to guarantee people's rights and not only to restrict them. It's a question about approach. So if a demonstration is going to be held, it's also a question about the security forces making sure that also the demonstrators would be their rights would be upheld and they could exercise this right which belongs to them in terms of freedom of assembly. But I won't have the time to go into details on those things. Then about rethinking our approach and the restrictive measures, how they are. They are a foreign policy tool. They are not restrictions on Zimbabwe, they are restrictions on European actors. And this is where we are coming from. When people say that these are illegal, we have a bunch of lawyers in Brussels who are designing these instruments and particularly making sure that they are not contravening international law because they are restrictions on European operators. A European company can't sell arms in Zimbabwe, but it's not a restriction on any Zimbabwean operator. A European company can't cooperate with the Zimbabwe defense industries, but it's not a restriction on anybody else doing that or whatever happening in Zimbabwe. And then again, the question about measures on individuals. We're talking about issues such as asset freeze and travel ban. It's if you own a restaurant, I think you are also at liberty of saying who can come into your restaurant. So it's an issue about so it's the Europeans putting limitations on themselves with these restrictive measures. Efficient or not. There's various opinions about this, and people, I hear arguments going both ways on these. But ultimately, the fate of those kind of measures are then decided on the basis of what is happening in the country. They have been relaxed substantially since 2010, and this leads me to the next question about how we handled Zimbabwe with kid gloves. Indeed, for a while. In the 2000s, we had what we call the appropriate measures, which were basically a freezing of development cooperation. That was then discontinued, and from 2014 onwards, we have what we are calling as National Indicative Program, where we are supporting then Zimbabwe through development cooperation. Obviously, I wasn't here those days, but a part of that is that yes, we are cooperating with the government, we are partnering with the government, but we are thinking about what is good for Zimbabwe as a whole and for its people. So the sectors that we then, from 2014 onwards, have been cooperating in are governance, health, and agriculture, and for various reasons. Governance, because we have wanted to support the reform agenda. Health, because there's certainly need, and unfortunately still is, to support the health sector. And agriculture, because we see that as a potential engine of growth for Zimbabwe, and so that's why we have been designing. So it was, the motivation has been, really to support Zimbabwe to move forward. Now, so whether that is an indication of softness, it might be interpreted that way, but I think it was very much an interest of engaging with the country, and that's why I was referring to the next multi-annual financial framework, because now we will start the process of thinking what we'll do next, what will the European Union be doing in, basically, with all the countries in the world, and Zimbabwe being one of those. There was one, the earlier one about the emotional dimension and artists, and I regret to say that we would, I would hope to have much more resources to engage with the cultural scene and arts in Zimbabwe, which I think are very interesting. I've seen various art forms that make you cry, make you laugh in this country, and I would hope that we would have more, could engage with more of that, but then there's significant restrictions on finances of how we can engage. We have some support, but not very much. But I do recognize, and that's a bit of a difficult angle to tackle from a diplomatic point of view, this emotional one, because we try to detach from the emotions and try to be as rational, but obviously we are all human beings. And then finally, one more point that I want to reflect upon, issue about social sector support, the economic situation, needing an influx of money into the country, and at the same time, if there's no reforms, then that money would not necessarily be forthcoming. In Zimbabwe, you can perceive this as a catch-22. If you don't get funding from the outside, the economy will not take off. But then on the other hand, you know, those creditors would not probably be very lenient, you know, in this, if there's no reforms taken ahead of that, and that then will take time. This might appear like a catch-22 in Zimbabwe, and but then the further you go, and when you go then to discuss these issues in those fora that are decisive, the multilateral financial institutions and the Paris Club of Creditors, they are looking at the question of like, okay, Zimbabwe is looking for debt forgiveness, debt restructuring. The question is why? Why should we be there? Why should we support? What is it happening? Why should we do that? And we really need to have very good arguments to respond to that, and that's why the reform agenda is so crucial in that respect, to move there. And quite honestly, when then you have news such as like the Auditor General's report about earlier use about public finances, that's not very helpful either in those discussions. So it is an issue. The IMF recognizes that's an issue, that you need social cushioning, and we are trying to see what we can do in terms of development cooperation to help that. We have come forward with humanitarian aid, just like some other Western countries have done the same. But in terms of the overall debt issues, I believe firmly that it's very strongly linked to the reform agenda. Thank you.
Fully, and I think as the Zimbabwe Human Rights NGO Forum, we will continue to do our work in the corner of victims, so that we are able to assist them in the best way we can. And we don't intend to be meddling in the mandate of the police, because our mandate and the mandate of the police is very different. And yes, I would also want to say that it is important that in terms of platforms are also created at the local level. They might be in their infancy, but there is work that is happening in some parts of the country. Obviously, it's not easy to be able to cover the length and breadth of Zimbabwe at the same time. So I think we are taking key steps in terms of us being able to talk to the people who matter, people who are affected more about the crisis that we are talking about. And then the issue of constitutional awareness is also an issue that we are seized with. But obviously it's something that is not going to end overnight. I think you recognize that we have 16 languages that are recognized in the Constitution. And it's also about us being able to have all those languages for those people to also follow in terms of the dialogue that's supposed to be happening. So I do appreciate that really the conversations need to go to the lower level. And it's work that we have started slowly to get to some parts of the country. Thank you.
I think what I can say maybe in my concluding remarks is that we have made a very clear proposal, especially from the church, that the nature of the national crisis and challenges that we face require a broad-based and a comprehensive national dialogue. We have also, I think this is in agreement across the political divide, that this is not meant to replace the conversation that is happening among politicians at the Poland. But what we are looking for is how do we structure a conversation that involves all Zimbabweans and that will resolve the challenges that face Zimbabwe. We are also convinced that we have missed opportunities for this, for the way we have resolved conflict situations in the past. After the Lancaster House Agreement, for example, which was an elite arrangement, we did not have a broad-based national conversation on how we reimagined the nation. And some few years after that, of course, we saw thousands of people being killed in Midlands and Matabeleland. In 1987, when there was an agreement to stop the violence, again it was an elite agreement of the government, the Unity Accord. But after that, we did not have a broad-based national conversation to say how do we close the chapter of the past and reimagine the future together. And of course, what we had in the Government of National Unity in 2009 allowed us to also stop the violence that had emerged around a decade of violence. But after that, we never had a serious national conversation on how we wanted to reimagine the future together. And of course, in 2017, we also did not manage to do the same. The question is whether we are going to find a solution to give closure to the current crisis and not have that meaningful conversation. And we are saying we should not. This will be a missed opportunity. If we do not take this crisis as an opportunity for us to have very serious and deep engagement on what has bedeviled this nation in the more than 40 years ago, I think we will have lost a big opportunity. Just to conclude, I would say that we, in our evaluation, we think that there are three issues that we will need to address with this conversation. First is how do we bring closure to the hurts of the past that create a very deep sense of insecurity about the future. How do we bring a closure to that? And I think this is a conversation that needs to be had across the political divide and across different sectors of society. The second conversation we need to have is how do we deepen constitutional democracy, and so that we give respect and recognition of institutions more than building our hopes on individuals and personalities. This, I think, will be a major investment for that conversation. Last but not least is how do we build an inclusive economy? An economy that does not depend on who you know, an economy that does not depend on patronage, an economy that does not depend on who is closest to the feeding trough, an economy that is not dependent on corruption. This conversation is a conversation we must all have. I'm glad to state that actually these conversations have begun, and they've begun at different levels. Yes, there are some conversations that are happening publicly, but there are so many serious conversations that are even happening behind the scenes. And I can say to my sister, Tsitsi, yes, there is also even conversation with the different arms of the security sector. But what we need to do is to make sure that these conversations become mainstream, and that everyone starts to participate in it. And I think that's why I want to also very much respect creating platforms like these ones, because I think they allow us to find a common narrative of how such a national conversations should be designed. Nations that have chosen the path of dialogue have produced outcomes that were sustainable and that produced results that the broader citizenry were satisfied with. The current aspirations that are winners take all, that work with the replacement motif, that if you replace this person with this person, things will improve. I think that is not going to produce what we all desire. Thank you very much for having me in your platform.